Hello, today we have James Foster, the Chief Executive Officer of Virax Biolabs Group Limited, trading on the Nasdaq under the ticker VRAX. James, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be here once again.
James, for viewers brand new to the story, can you give us a brief overview of Virax Biolabs and your lead program, ViraxImmune?
Sure. So, Virax Biolabs, we're a biotech company, and what we're really focused on is immune response testing and the development of diagnostic tools for conditions where the immune system is playing a central role. So, what does that mean, and what is our lead program? Our lead program is what's called ViraxImmune. It's a blood-based immune profiling test, and it's in development for post-acute infection syndromes. What are post-acute infection syndromes? Long COVID, chronic fatigue syndrome, post-treatment Lyme. And these are conditions where patients can experience persistent, life-altering issues following infection and where there's no objective testing tools.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. And you also mentioned long COVID. Now, your estimates point to up to 21 million US adults with long COVID and related syndromes, most, as you intimated just now, diagnosed by symptoms rather than an objective test. Now, what problem is Virax Immune built to solve there?
So the core problem within this post-acute infection syndrome piece is that these represent a very large patient population. So in the US, burden is estimated to be in total 21 million people, and the incidence rate is 2.5 million people, i.e., the number of patients per year. So you're talking about millions and millions of folks out there. But there is no diagnostic infrastructure that's caught up with the scale of this disease. Many of these patients are going through long diagnostic journeys. These are through exclusion and symptoms. Many of the patients have persistent fatigue, cognitive issues, respiratory symptoms, and so on and so forth. There is no single objective test to help confirm what's happening to them biologically. ViraxImmune is being built to address this gap. Our test is designed to measure immune response pattern associated with these conditions rather than relying on symptom checklists or exclusions of other diseases, which is what currently happens now.
Now, James, last month's pilot data showed 88% specificity and 92% positive predictive value. What do these new data tell investors, and what makes your test different from how these conditions are assessed today?
So I think the key message for investors is, as I mentioned in my first answer, there is no objective test out there for post-acute infection syndromes. And with the number of patients involved, you're talking about millions of people, a huge clinical burden that ViraxImmune is attempting to resolve. How does the data play a part in that? The pilot data is really important because what it's showing is that the test is, in the data set, highly specific and it has a high positive predictive value. The specificity is important because it can test the difference between the healthy controls and reduce false positive. The PPV is also important because it speaks to the likelihood that a positive result is meaningful in the tested population. Um, and so for investors specifically, the significance is that we're ready to move into a larger clinical trial, but the early clinical signals that we're seeing support advancements as we move forward. And so that's really significant from our perspective.
Now, James, you've completed an initial FDA pre submission meeting. You have a planned clinical trial with Emory University, and you've secured two types of ISO certification. How do those steps de risk your path to market?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that each of those steps alone de-risks a different part of our development pathway. The FDA pre-sub meeting, as we would call it, helps reduce regulatory risk. It means that we're not just developing in a vacuum. The planned US clinical trial you mentioned with Emory University is important because it shows that we're working towards getting US relevant clinical evidence. It also proves that we're working with a respected US academic and clinical partner, and that strengthens our pathway. The two ISO certifications are also important because it shows that we're not just about science, we're about manufacturing too. And these ISOs require quality systems, manufacturing discipline, documentation, and so on and so forth. So when you put all these together, it reduces regulatory risk, as I said, clinical evidence, and quality system risk. This just makes the basis for our evolution more and more significant.
James, you've laid out a validation led roadmap. You've laid out a larger 300 sample validation with analysis beginning in the fourth quarter of this year and results in the first quarter of 2027. All of this feeding a U.S. first commercial strategy ahead of broader IVD development. Now, that is a mouthful, James. Can you just walk us through and illuminate that sequence right now?
Certainly. So looking back, we've spent the last year in development and within our lab, heads down, working on the R&D. We had our data readout, as you know, last month, which looks very promising. The next stage for us is Q4 clinical validation testing. We hope to have the results from that in Q1 of next year. With regard to US commercial launch, assuming we continue to see the data that we're seeing in the lab and supports the program that we have, we would like to look at a US LDT launch, perhaps in Q1 or Q2 of next year, highly dependent on our lab processes.
And finally, James, what's the essential value proposition? Why should investors take an interest in Virax Biolabs right now?
So the essential value proposition for Virax is really straightforward. Long COVID and post-acute infection syndromes affect millions of people. So in the US, you're talking about 21 million person burden, 2.5 million person incidence rate. But today, many of these patients are just assessed solely on symptoms, clinical history, and exclusions. So what this does is it creates a real gap for physicians, patients, and eventually therapeutic developers who need better ways to identify and stratify this huge population. So in conclusion, from an investor perspective, I think that the opportunity is that Virax combines several attractive features in one: a large medical unmet need, a differentiated diagnostic platform, and near-term clinical validation milestones. We have potential US LDT launch, as we previously discussed, as well as the broader IVD potential over time.
Excellent story, James. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much.